Good evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this Brennan Center for Justice event here at NYU Law. I'm Trevor Morrison. I'm the dean of this law school and also very proud to be a member of the board of the Brennan Center. As many of you know, the Brennan Center is a nonpartisan law and policy institute that works to reform and revitalize, and when necessary, and it is necessary, to defend the systems of democracy and justice and the rule of law. It has been deeply engaged in addressing what we see as a new and alarming set of assaults on norms of constitutional democracy and the rule of law, and I urge you to keep up with their work. It is also my pleasure to introduce our guests this evening. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a distinguished writer-in-residence at NYU's own Arthur Carter Journalism Institute, and we are very grateful to Ted Conover and his team at the Carter Institute for helping make this event possible. Ta-Nehisi, as you all know, is a best-selling and award-winning author, a MacArthur Award recipient, among many other things, and we are thrilled that he is part of the NYU community as well. Hosting the conversation with him this evening is Melissa Murray, a professor here at NYU Law. She, too, is a relatively new member of the NYU family, having joined our faculty this year after 12 years on the faculty at the University of California, Berkeley. She teaches and writes in the areas of constitutional law, family law, and reproductive rights and justice, among others, and she is also a member of the Brennan Center's board. It gives me great pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming, on behalf of the Brennan Center and the law school, Melissa Murray and Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Hi. Are we doing that again? We already said hi.
I know. We're pretending like this is the first time. We've actually met each other before in other circumstances. So let me just say welcome to NYU. Again, I feel weird welcoming you because I feel like I just got here. But it's a great place.
When did you come?
So I was here last year visiting, and then this is my first full year on the faculty.
I actually got here before you.
So maybe you should welcome me.
Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Welcome to NYU.
Thank you. So can I ask a question? I know why I'm here, and it makes sense that I'm here. I've been in academic communities for my entire career, but you've had a really storied career as a writer. So why join a university at this point in your career?
Yeah, it's a question I ask myself a lot. No, in all seriousness, first of all, thank you guys for coming out tonight. I was joking backstage that I would not have come to see myself tonight. I had like 10 friends, and they were like, "Give me on the guest list. I want to be there." Every single one of them canceled. Literally all of them. I got to know from myself, just no one's coming. No one's coming. I was like, Jesus.
It's cold.
It is. But all of my friends, though. It's my friends, man.
I think you have to have deeper relationships when it gets below 10.
I guess. And I especially want to thank, I don't know if we have any J School students here, but if we do, are there any? Raise your hand. All right, beautiful. They're none of my students here, are they? Oh, really? Is there? Who's here? Oh, thank you for coming, Talia. He's one of my students from last year.
Talia's getting an A.
Yeah. Talia already got an A. That was last year.
Oh. Any law school students? All right. Any family law students?
Wow.
All A's. There they are. Perfect.
So part of it is like what happens after you write. So I started my career in 1996. So it's been about 23 years now. I'm going to 23 years. And what you're trying to do as a writer, I compare it to, athletics a lot in the sense that you go through certain steps over and over and over again, trying to cultivate a kind of muscle memory so that you're not really thinking about it anymore. So somebody can teach you how to, shoot a jumper, and then you go shoot 1,000 jumpers a day. And, you won't become Steph Curry, but you hope to get to the point where you are not actually thinking about the steps it takes to, shoot a jump shot. The problem with that is you actually forget the steps, and you're not really conscious of what you're doing at a point because you do it so much. And like one of the cool things about teaching is that in order to teach, you have to actually go back and break down every step. You almost have to recall what you forgot. but what you had to forget about the foundations of learning. That old saying, those who can't do teach, is the dumbest saying in the world.
Yes.
Like it's a deeply, deeply stupid.
And insulting.
Deeply and insulting.
Totally
There are
insulting.
plenty of people who do and can't teach, actually. You know what I mean? Like literally can't. Like wouldn't be able.
Not here.
Right, right. Or at all, like literally can't explain, you know. I mean, I know this as a journalist asking, you know, it's nothing like try to ask an artist why they did X, Y, and Z. And it's actually a tremendously hard question. And so I taught for a while up at MIT, and that was the first time I had that experience back in 2012. And I just gained so much respect for having to do the actual very hard work. So it's easy to say this is good, but to actually figure out why it's good, what the writer's doing. I think when you're at a school like this with the beautiful students that we have over at the J School, they also see things that you don't see. And so even things that you kind of take for granted that you thought you understood, you get more insight into them. So I look at it as like the other half of my writing. I do the work that I do, and this is the time to break down the writing. And most of the stuff I assign is stuff that I absolutely love. And so a lot of times the students are telling me why I love it, believe it or not. Like they're actually explaining it to me as we break it down, or why I shouldn't love it, because sometimes they don't like what I love. So there's that too. So I enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy it.
What are you teaching this semester?
So my class is called Writing for Reporters. And it comes out of, again, out of my own biography. Before I was a journalist, I always loved the sound of words. And I actually thought when I was, at Howard in my, freshman and sophomore year, that I would go on and get an MFA in poetry. I took a workshop with Yusef Kuminyaka, who was here for a while, actually. He's still here. Yusef is still here, actually. And it's weird, because I was in that workshop with Yusef Kuminyaka and Terrence Hayes and Yona Harvey. These are like big-time poets, if there are any poetry fans in here. And it immediately became clear to me that I did not have the talent to be a poet. It's like, you just don't have it. It's like they talk about like concert pianists, and at a certain age, it's like either you got it or you don't. And poetry doesn't get that respect, but it's actually true of poetry. But I always had that love of words, and I spent a good part of my early part of my career trying to inject that into my writing. And I think, I don't know, but I think to the extent that people respond to what I write, it is not so much the arguments that I make, or that's just one part of it. I think the other part is how it's actually said and how it's written. I think like when people have intense emotional reactions to things that I write, I think part of it is like what I'm saying, but I think like a less understood part of it is the way it's actually put. And in journalism, writing assumes a kind of backseat, because obviously the basis is your reporting and your research. That's so important. But as I tell my students, I don't want people to read what I write and say, wow, this guy Ta-Nehisi is technically correct, and then walk away. Like
When you're a lawyer, that's exactly what you
No, you want that, but what I want more than that is I want them to like put down the article or the book and then go tell their friends. And then I want them, at dinner to be talking about it and go to bed thinking about it, and wake up. The verb I always use, I want the work should haunt people, and if it doesn't haunt, I don't know why I'm doing it. So I'm trying to teach these kids how to write things that haunt.
So I think it's really interesting because I do think you write things that haunt. You are a beautiful writer. I usually associate journalism with a kind of economy and parsimony, and not necessarily always with the lyricism I associate with your work. I think I just read something that you wrote where you called President Trump orcish. And I was like, yes, orcish is exactly the word. But the sort of flair for language is not, maybe it's just like when you are like stringers on articles, you don't see that, but I take your view of journalism is that you don't sacrifice the beauty and the lyricism for the economy.
Yeah, that's because I think beauty is actually economical. I don't think, like, people believe that, as you say, lyricism and economy are like opposites, but I think that's actually not true. I think beautiful writing, when it's done well, takes the least amount of words possible and puts the most punch it can in. And this, again, goes back to my background, coming up as a poet. That's what poets are really trying to do. They're trying to shove as much emotion as possible, as much feeling as possible into as few words as possible, which, obviously has, some sort of relation to journalism. And so for me, like, I never, saw it like that. I know I write really long articles. But from my perspective, it's like, believe it or not, I'm trying not to use any words that I don't have to. Like orcish might be a lyrical word, but
so perfect.
Yeah. And I think it has like 5 different things in it at the same time.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's that's what you're trying to do. You want the person to think 5 different, complicated but kind of coherent things all at once. And so that for me is what economy and efficiency is all about anyway.
So where are you writing downtown? So you used to write at the Hungarian bakery in Morningside Heights. Did you eat anything there?
Yeah, I used to eat croissants every day and then I had to stop.
So when I worked up at Columbia at the beginning of my career, they had great rougouage, and I ate so much rougouage from that place. So you're not up there now. So
I was just there Sunday.
Okay. Any place here with good croissants?
Can't say.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Because I don't. If you see me there, that's fine. But I can't say where else I go down here.
Okay, so he's haunting places, just not for you. Okay, all good.
They are for you. They are for
But
you.
it has to happen organically and serendipitously.
Yeah, I think I have not reached the point where so many people come up to me like that I can't work. And I don't want to reach the point where so many people come up to me that I can't work.
That's fair. So you called Trump orcish. How would you describe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whom I saw you interviewed the other day at MLK Now?
Wow. So you can't, that's the thing about writing, you can't put me on the spot like that. Because what I would have to do is I would have to sit back. Like, you know how long it took me to get to the word orcish?
It took me exactly 2 seconds to say orcish is exactly the right word.
Man, it probably took me 2 weeks.
It's a great word.
Yeah, I probably had a different word every day in Scribe. That doesn't work. That's
Okay,
not
so
it. That's
it's an
not
unfair question. That's unfair. The interview between you and AOC was so interesting to me because you and I are the same generation, and she is a younger person.
Right.
And I think I went into, she's a younger person.
Significantly.
Significantly younger. And I think there are times when I think I, like you, watch her, and I'm like, that is a younger person's move. This is a younger person's game. And then you asked her questions I think I would have asked, because there are things that she does where I'm like, oh, don't do that. And then she explained herself, and I was like, oh, maybe, like, she's taught me something. Like, I am an older person, and I need to learn new tricks. So did you feel like that about the interview?
I think I said this. I really hope I said this. I'm still not convinced. I get it. I think she's brilliant and very intelligent, and we had a conversation about social media and the uses of Twitter.
Her Twitter game is incredibly strong. I mean, didn't she just have a class like where she was talking about I taught Nancy Pelosi?
I hope again, and I think I communicated my my feelings, when I was up on stage with her. I got her explanation. I feel it. Okay, let me say the big thing. The big thing is she has done an incredible job as a freshman who has only, been in Congress, 3 days, to shift the conversation. I mean, it really is incredible. Like, I asked her on stage, I said, do you think, like, in this society, having billionaires is any sort of moral outcome? And people debated that, like her answer, which was no, for like a week. And then I saw, like, the town hall with Kamala, and they asked Kamala Harris that. And so the way she has shifted the conversation, around wealth and justice and inequality is pretty incredible. You know what I mean? So I think from that perspective, I could very well be wrong about her usage of social media. My working hypothesis is that I'm not, though. And that in the long run, I don't know if this works.
So what do you think happens in the long run?
I think you make a grievous error. One of the things that, and this is coming from a journalism
A
perspective.
Kevin Hart error, or?
I don't think like that, because
Okay.
I don't think that was an error. I think that's who Kevin Hart is, which is a very different thing. But I think, and this, like, I guess this is not, to some extent, this is not about her, this is about me. Coming into my field, what I noticed, and what I vowed would never happen, was you would see these Sunday talk shows and journalists would go on there and they would be so obviously bullshitting. You know what I mean? Like a guy who's covered, I don't know, the Walter Mondale campaign is talking about like the Iraq war as though he's some sort of like authority. It's a constant thing. I mean, journalists still do this, on talk shows, and I vowed never to do that. But what I quickly realized was, if your job is to talk a lot, you have to say something stupid. You just have to. It's not because you're a bad person. It's not 'cause the most brilliant person in the world eventually says something stupid if they have to talk at a certain, clip. And I just think
It's inevitable.
I think it's inevitable, and I think talking that much on social media leaves a trail that maybe you would not want to. Now the flip side of this is it could also be true that being wrong actually isn't that bad for her. Mm-hmm. She's wrong, so what? And then, she keeps going, and then it actually doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But I just feel like, the people who are out to get her, the people who are her enemies, I think I can use that word, like they don't play fair, man. They do not play fair, and I just worry, and I hope, this was conveyed in the interview, I worry because I'm so impressed with her. Mm-hmm. I'm so impressed with her as a candidate, sorry, not a candidate, as a congresswoman, and hopefully as a candidate for something higher at some point. I'll leave that out though. I just worry that, like she gets taken out and you don't get to see that kind of potential, in her.
You don't want her to be a
politics.
one-hit wonder.
Well, I don't think she's that, because I think what she did, I think already it's significant. Yeah, I think this is actually quite significant. I just, I want her to be around for a while, and I want her to, shift, continue to shift conversations. I think she's got a good heart. I think she has a brilliant mind. I think she has, energy. I think she does a great job of, walking on, these two, for whatever reason, these, between these two paths that, have befuddled, Democrats, where she's able to talk about, the very real problems of inequality, the very real problems of wealth, being captured by such a small group of people, and at the same time, actually have, intelligent responses, around gender, around race, and she does it naturally and easily, and it's a beautiful thing to see, and I would like to be able to see that for a long time.
So one of the things she talks about is mass incarceration.
And again, I just want to be clear. I could be dead wrong. I just want to be real clear about that. Like it's just what I think, man. You know what I mean?
That's how you're hedging on being an older person. Like, because older people aren't.
Oh, no, you know what older people do? They think they know everything.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. That we think we say, and
you're hedging. Like,
I am hedging. I am, because I watch older people do that. Like I remember being a rap fan when I was a kid, and people would be like, this isn't music. It won't be around in 10 years. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be, which is very different than.
Turn down that music, kids.
Right. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? So I don't want to be one of those people. You know, she may conquer the world with Twitter, and then, I'd be wrong.
So she's shifted lots of conversations. She's probably talked less about mass incarceration than other candidates, but that might be an issue where moving the ball a little would be important, because we've talked a lot about policing and sort of common practices, and another legal scholar, James Foreman, has hypothesized that one of the reasons middle-class Black people are comfortable talking about policing and enforcement and why it's part of the national conversation is because that is the most immediate threat to them. Like, they could imagine themselves, they can imagine their sons and their daughters being stopped by the police on the street. The prospect of mass incarceration feels much more remote. But your writing suggests that it's actually much closer than we perhaps appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm loath to disagree with James, who is absolutely brilliant, and knows this stuff up one side, down the other. But the majority of Black people I know, class aside, do not have to reach very far to find somebody in prison. Now, it might not be your, I don't know, well, it is for me. I was going to say it might not be your brother, but you know what I mean? I'll just say, you just don't have to go that far. If you go to the family reunion, even if you're middle class, there usually is somebody, who's been incarcerated there. For me, it would be multiple people. And so And I don't know that that would be the same experience for a white NYU professor. You know what I mean? In my, like, if they're, whatever the white, counterpart of me is, I don't know that it would be, the same. I think the distance is quite different. I saw, there's a, God, I'm gonna remember this guy's name. Ralph, I'm gonna remember his name, sorry. He's a sociologist up at Harvard, and it's not Ralph, I'm blanking on his first name. Sampson is his last name. Anyway, don't worry about it. Sociologist, he did this book on Chicago, right?
Someone is telling me, Alyssa Shark.
Robert. Ralph Sampson was the basketball player, thank you.
UVA!
Robert Sampson, he wrote this brilliant book on Chicago, and he has a chart, and it like graphs incarceration, and on one end are all the black neighborhoods, regardless of class. And on the other end are all, the white neighborhoods. I guess it would be like this. The black would be up here. And there is no overlap at all. Like Chatham, which at that point was, pretty middle class, like nice houses and everything, is not even close to the poorest white neighborhood.
So regardless, as an African American, regardless of your class, regardless of your station, the impact of mass incarceration will touch your life. Maybe in an immediate way, maybe more remotely, but you will feel the impact of it in some way. So why don't we talk about it in the same way we talk about global warming or climate change, which we see as immediate and urgent problems?
Yeah, I think one of the things that James did identify in his work is the tension within the black community on, some of this where, anybody that's been to a community meeting knows that black people don't like crime either. And surprise. No, because there's this whole meme out, right, that like, black people only protest like when like the police, and people who say they have never lived in a black neighborhood, have never seen a Stop the Violence march, which you see all the time in Chicago. But I think like we haven't had too many tools, right? You know what I mean? Because we take what the society gives us. And if it's more police, you know what I mean, that's what we, have to choose from. So I think there is, some degree of tension over this. And I actually think, this criminal justice conversation around Kamala Harris is going to test that a lot.
How so?
I'll be clear, like when I watch those truancy videos, there's a huge problem for me. It would not shock me if when she goes to South Carolina, it's not a huge problem.
So she's an interesting candidate. So like she is from the Bay Area, Oakland. I am from the Bay Area, Oakland. I've seen her over time. And it's really interesting. And it's interesting to sort of watch her progression. I saw her as the DA in San Francisco. I saw her as the AG in California. And then I saw her as the senator. And I think there are real differences in her positions in all three of those spaces. And part of me wonders if to be a law enforcement officer, and the DA is a law enforcement officer, the AG is a law enforcement officer, as a black woman, a single black woman in California, do you have to do things that you might not want to do and have the freedom not to do when you're a senator?
And also in the time in which she was one, which is not right now. Probably, but I think again, and this is just me talking, the kind of, I don't want to, almost glee, or maybe glee is too strong, certitude almost that she showed in like the videos where she's talking, and I don't know, I guess most of you guys are familiar with this, but Kamala Harris at the time, she had this idea that by prosecuting parents for truancy, or threatening to prosecute parents for truancy, in fairness to her, threatening to prosecute parents for truancy, she would be able to connect them with social services in the area, that would give in, a way to getting, to the family. And she's very proud of this. In the video, she's very, very proud of this. And it's not like, I just want to be clear, I don't want to bash, because what she's saying is I'm trying to help you. She's not, it's not lock them up, that's not the rhetoric she's using. And yet, nevertheless, I have a big problem with that,
It's very Obama-esque.
It's very Obama-esque. It's, it's very, very Obama-esque in the sense that, there are embedded presumptions of black people, I would argue, of poor people, in that approach, the notion that I have to help you by pointing a gun at you. I mean, I don't know about that. That sounds like Iraq War to me, where I invade your country in order to liberate you. People who are weak, we tend to use, and it's getting back to your conversation about mass incarceration. We tend to use the stick, of the state in order to quote unquote help them. But we don't, do that with people, who are strong. And so like, when I think about, I was reading, this piece the other day, and there was a mother who was locked up, for 180 days. 180 days, man, I mean, jail is not fun. Like, jail is bad. Jail is where, Khalid Browder died. Jail is not a good place. And the notion that because somebody's kid didn't go to school, they should go to jail. I mean, that's tough. I don't care if you help. I don't care if the truancy rate dropped to 10%. Just from a moral perspective, I that's hard for me to accept.
So it's a really important point, I think, that bears repeating. Like, there are various technologies of discipline that get imposed on the weak, and as you know, the weak are often the underclass. So mass incarceration is one scourge. The foster care system and the child welfare system is surely another. Truancy might be a species of that, and they're all of these technologies of discipline. But I would suggest that these technologies are not just about disciplining the weak, but about also casting a shadow that in turn disciplines everyone else, or at least everyone who might be associated with the weak. I mean, I think about the child welfare system. Like, I know as an empirical matter that I am unlikely to have my children removed from me. Nevertheless, when I'm screaming at my son in the subway, I'm thinking, and like, is someone watching me? Is someone observing this? I'm a black woman and I'm screaming at my kid. Maybe I should stop screaming at my kid. But and I think that's the point. Like, I know as an empirical matter that I'm not the person that they're likely to look for, but yeah.
Set an example?
Well, I think it is an example setting, or at least a way to discipline. I mean, disciplining can happen in lots of ways, and maybe this is the point of mass incarceration. For black people, at least, that maybe it's not you, maybe it's your cousin or your brother or whatever, but the system is meant to discipline all of us.
Yeah, and I guess that's by the way, I'm gonna have to think on that. That idea that something is being said to the larger society, the message, because I hadn't actually considered that.
You gotta come hang out at the law school. That's what we talk about.
Invite me. Y'all invited me. I'm here.
You have a standing invitation. Come to family law. Those students will be there every day if you are there.
So actually, I'm going to do that too. You know why? Because I dropped out of school, and there's so much I did not learn. And I should just be going around NYU and sitting in classes. I got to finish this book first. But when I'm done with that, that's what I'm going to do with my time at NYU. But one of the things I guess that really bothers me about that is you can see, that discipline model extending across the board. One of the things that I talk about in Between the World and Me is like the schools, right? You know what I mean? Like one of the most shocking experiences I had was when it was time for my son to go to school. And we didn't have a lot of money, but we had, I guess, what would be called a lot of social wealth in the sense that we knew people and knew places to go. The difference between how his teachers talked to him when there was a problem and the way I was dealt with, which was, very reminiscent of this, no excuses model. The notion that for black people and you have to threaten, you have to cajole, in every aspect. And it's old, man. It goes back to it goes back to slavery, but from a liberal perspective, it actually goes back to immediately after slavery with Reconstruction. Yeah. And these folks coming south and thinking they have to threaten black people or explain to black people why they should get married. Yeah. You know what I mean? When these people are dying to get married, minus a world of racism, I am not convinced that we would look at a mother, because it's going to be mostly mothers when you're talking about truancy laws, that we would look, minus racism, I am not convinced that we would look at a mother and say, the best way to deal with this is through prosecution. Yeah. I suspect we might try to find out what was going on there. You know what I mean? Before we threaten prosecution. That doesn't mean that Kamala Harris is looking and saying, I'm trying to go out and get black women. That's not how it works. It's systemic. Your options are shrank, reduced, and so you end up operating in a space, which goes back to the point that you were making at the beginning about, well, what compromises do you have to be a single black woman who's a prosecutor in the first place? Well, those are the lines within which you can operate. From my perspective, as a writer and a journalist, though, my sympathy is with that woman who was in jail for 180 days.
So mass incarceration, it seems, is like one of these critical issues for you, at least going into the next election cycle.
We keep getting off that subject.
No, I mean, we can get off this. I just we have these new candidates that keep popping up every day. Not all of them are talking about mass incarceration. Should they be? And if they should be, what should the nature of the conversation be?
Yeah, no, they should. But I feel what has happened is that, and I'm here, so I guess I'm going to talk. Everybody says I'm pessimistic. Well, you're about to catch it now. I fear that what you are now seeing will become a permanent feature in America. That is too much to disentangle. So it's been a few years since I looked at these numbers, but I think I'm about right. If you look at the early 1970s, America is basically where the rest of the industrialized world is in terms of mass incarceration. Y'all can yell out and correct me. I know I'm here with a bunch of folks who know this stuff better than me, so feel free if I say something completely egregious. And then you get to, the 2015, 2016, you're talking about 700, 750, per 100,000. Now, last I looked, it had gone down a little bit, but we are so far off from where the rest of the world is. I mean, how do you, the incredible sociologist Diva Page, who just passed, and who was so influential in my work. In her book Marked, at one point she says, if you opened the prisons and jails today, you would have enough people to fill every fast food job in America 5 times over. What are you gonna do with these people? You have created a structure that is so large, so sprawling. You have created independent interests, unions, across the board, a private prison, industry. How does this get unspooled? I'm not convinced that it will be.
So you make a point in your writing that I think is exactly spot on, that the prison has become, since the Great Society, really the only site of broad and holistic social services in the United States.
Which takes us back to Kamala Harris and prosecuting, by the way, because she's prosecuting to administer social service.
I think it's a great point. And I think, again, not only is the United States off the charts in terms of the number of individuals incarcerated, that number reflects the fact that as a civilized society, we do not have the same level of social services that are comparators, like the Scandinavian democracies, all of it. And so instead what we have is the family, which provides most of the privatization of dependency. And when the family fails, we have this criminal model, and it's not just mass incarceration.
To some extent, the church.
Well, I mean, private forms, like the privatization of dependency, the family, the church, but then you have the child welfare system, then you have the education system, and then eventually prison. And it's a cradle-to-grave system that creates an underclass for whom social services are offered and you never actually have to offer the social services in the first place.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, when you're talking about large numbers of prisoners who have, some sort of mental illness, who have, some sort of drug addiction, or chemical addiction of some. I mean, you are now talking about a social service provider, whether you like it or not. It's not the kind we would want. It's a punitive one. When you're talking about, God, I can't remember what the percentage was, but when you start talking about black folks or black males who have not graduated from high school, and you see huge numbers of them, bound to do some sort of time in prison, that's a social, that's the way we've chosen to address that population of people. That's what I'm trying to say. That's a choice that we've made. And so, I mean, again, to say nothing, to the whole employment question at this, and I think this is really, really important, that there's somebody on the other side of that equation that's actually getting something out of social services being provided in that way. It's a huge, huge problem. And so to get back to your question, when you were asking why isn't it being talked about more, I don't know that it hasn't just been accepted. I understand that there are reforms happening at the state level, across the country. I'm aware of that. I'm aware that, when you talk about mass incarceration, you are mostly talking about a state level, phenomenon. But to get this country back, to get the country back to where it was in 1970, and then to actually repair the damage that was done. I mean, is that going to happen? I'm sorry, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it feels preposterous, And that is to say nothing of the whole Michelle Alexander question, which is this actually the system working as intended? It's not actually that hard to explain. This is kind of what we wanted to happen. I mean, one of the things, I'm wound up on this. One of the things that, I found that was, quite shocking, that her book came out, and I was kind of like, nah, this it can't be this simple. And then you start reading, like, the testimonies, and you start reading the way, say, Southern senators talked about civil rights, and crime is always there. Crime is, if we integrate, there's going to be crime. Folks talking about D.C., the parks in D.C. are integrated now. There's crime. It's always there, and so you actually can see the evidence of it, having been there from jump. One last piece on this. There's a gentleman, and I always talk about this story, and I'm gonna have to get this gentleman's name down, but he did a research paper against sociology. I read a lot of sociology. I should have went and did sociology. But he did a research paper, and basically what he showed was the black-white incarceration ratio under Jim Crow. It was actually not that bad in the South, but it was really bad in the North. And what happens is immediately after you get integration, the South becomes, even with the North. And so what that showed was that Jim Crow was actually the system of social control. They didn't have to have mass incarceration, in the Jim Crow South. It wasn't necessary. Minus that, they started doing with the northern states. So when you start seeing that, and this is this study begins in 1900, you know what I mean? You start seeing something long-term, a kind of psychology about how we should, deal with black folks. And so how that gets unspooled, I mean, I don't know.
That's super depressing.
I hear that a lot.
I know. Well, I will.
No. You so hold up. Now, this is what I'm gonna do. Because you just said that, right? You said that's super depressing. Okay. So
in a bad way.
No. I mean, it isn't a bad way though, because it is super depressing. But do you have am I wrong? You understand what I'm saying?
I think you're exactly.
You're a law professor, so
No.
I'm dead serious about this. If that is over the top, if I'm being, you know what I mean?
So I mean, I think a lot about the family and the family as a mechanism of discipline and other modes of discipline that get imposed upon the family. So I also think about crime in a lot of ways. And I think you are right that in order for mass incarceration to happen, you have to have the naturalization of pathology, basically. And I think we do have that. And I think you see it very clearly in the way we talk about white families, about black families. I mean, I just told my students today, we were talking about wearing wedding rings, about how to formalize a marriage. And I told them, and taking your husband's name. And I did not take my husband's name. And when I was pregnant with my first child, my mother, who was a single mother, was very, very, very worried about this. Are you going to take his name? Now you're going to take his name because, you're walking around, you got these swollen hands, you're not wearing your wedding ring, and you don't have your husband's name. People are going to think you're a single mother, that you're not respectable. And so, I mean, she had internalized that in a really profound way. And I think there are lots of ways that pathology gets naturalized, and mass incarceration is certainly one of the most violent ways that it happens, but there are these other ways, and they're subtle, and they're insidious, and you find yourself performing them in these really odd ways, as my mother did. Speaking of my mother, let's talk about women for a minute. So, good segue. Strong. You recently gave an interview where you said, you were asked a question about the MeToo movement, and you said that this was sort of this eye-opening moment for you, and you imagined that your experience of hearing about the MeToo movement was a lot like the way your white audiences feel about race when they read your books. Like, I didn't appreciate the extent of the problem. So say a little bit more about this. Like, what do you think about the Me Too movement?
Yeah, I mean, I think like taking it back to the class and taking it back to journalism, I think like the power of journalism is how it can turn ideas into reality and can confront you with a way to make you realize something that maybe you kind of knew as an idea, but did not, or as a notion, but did not understand as a reality. So I'll take this back. When I published a case for reparations in 2014, I would be places and white people would come up to me and they would say, I read that article. I really had no idea about redlining. I had no idea at all. And they meant it. This was like like they were serious. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would have been, and it was clear to me at that time in the way that they approached me that it actually would have been deeply malicious to be like, how didn't you know? You know what I mean? Like, it was clear these were, good, well-meaning, folks who just literally did not know, about something that, if you're black, you just sort of take for granted, right? So Me Too happens, and, those stories start appearing. And had you asked me, before, say, the first Harvey Weinstein stuff came, do I think sexual harassment, sexual violence is a huge problem in Hollywood? I would have said, yeah. You said, do you think it's a big problem in the workplace? And I said, yeah. But, like, that's an abstract yeah. Do you know what I mean? That's not, well, he had his assistant, who was also a woman, invite me to the meeting under the pretext of her being there, and that made me comfortable, and then she left the room. And this dude could make me or break me in this chosen career. See, now that's institutional. That's systemic. That's a person with an entire operation. You know what I mean? To the point, like, once I got done with those articles, I was like, well, the movie making was a side business. This is like a kind of trafficking. This guy was a predator. He was in movies to be a predator. It was like his cover story. You know what I mean? And to be confronted with that in that way, and then when it started getting to like journalism, by which I mean my field, like when it became like people I knew or knew of, and people have rape buttons. Like Matt Law has a rape button in the office. Like, you can have that? You know what I mean? Like, it's a thing someone will install. You can literally sit at a desk and lock. I mean, you know what I mean? I was like those white people who come, I didn't know. I was stumbling, around. In fact, I called up, like, a couple of my students, women who I was close to, from teaching at, MIT. That was the last place I was. And I had to, like, talk to them. You know what I mean? Like, are you okay? Has anybody ever done this to you? Like, is this, like, a thing that happens? You know what I mean? And they sort of laughed at me, because I was very much in that position. I didn't know.
What happened to them?
Yeah. Not rape buttons, not quite that far.
That
but
was extreme.
Yeah, that was extreme. But it was pretty clear that a natural subtext of their lives was men as a threat. That just was there. And that was a thing that they, were very, very clearly negotiating, which again, like, I understand abstractly. But I think, like, the power of journalism and the power of storytelling is when you see it, like, in a narrative form, somebody's going through details of how it happened. And dudes always say, well, I have a daughter, I have a mother, I have a sister, I would, of course, I care about women. But when it's really good, actually you see yourself. Do you understand? Like, forget my wife, forget my sisters. Like, you start seeing yourself in it. You know what I mean? Like, the difference between, me and you is I just have more power. Yeah. That's the difference. And you start seeing it like that. I mean, it has been mind-blowing, for me personally. It just, it has changed a lot of things.
So is it different from the conversation about race? I mean, it seems like something has shifted in the dynamic that more and more people are talking about this and clearly no longer finding it tolerable. Do you think this is really changing hearts and minds, or are we going to have a kind of Me Too redemption in the same way as you chronicle, and we were 8 years in power, we have had a kind of redemption and retrenchment on the question of race.
I mean, probably. I think some of that's already started, you know. But I don't think, like, if Louis C.K. can, you know, go and do, wow, who I met like a year before this happened, like had, you know, so crazy. Had lunch with him like not too far. He actually gave me some great advice, man. Not too far. He did. I mean, he really, really did. Not too far from here. And then, you know, you see, wow, Jesus. Anyway, if Louis C.K. can go and do comedy shows, I don't think that makes the courage of folks who came out and said, well, like, I don't think that makes that worthless. You know, I think a price has been paid, you know, and should be paid, you know. So yes, there will be some sort of, I think, backlash, I guess is the way, you know, to put it. You know, and there'll always be, you know, people who think this is, you know, going too far, you know, it's not doing X, Y, and Z. But I think the world is better for it happening, you know, and I think that's just part of it. That's part of every, you know, revolution. There are always counter-revolutions, you know.
Do you think that the nature of the conversation is the right conversation to have? I mean, it's incredibly, like it's been framed around issues of desire, like Harvey Weinstein and these women that he finds attractive or whatever, Matt Lauer and women that he finds attractive, when, as you say, it's really about power, which is not about sexual desire at all. And yet that is not a conversation we're having. And nor are we having a conversation about what happens afterwards. I mean, Harvey Weinstein is going to court for this, he's being prosecuted for this, but there's still no woman that I know greenlighting movies at the Weinstein Company. I mean, have we missed an opportunity to have a broader conversation about what systemic change would look like in society?
So the Weinstein Company doesn't exist anymore, right? Like, I think they.
Well, that's why there's no woman there.
Yeah. But no, but I take your point. I mean, I think your point is, will this lead to more executives, period? I take your point. I don't know. This is actually where I tap out. Because probably somebody who did not know, you know, was in the space of, I didn't know, you know.
You're a structuralist. You care about structural impediments. And I think this is a place where we have scratched the surface, but not really.
What I would suspect, and again, like AOC, I might be wrong, but what I would suspect is when you have people able to do that much evil across fields, you're talking about something beyond the personal evil of the person doing the act.
Beyond the bad actor.
Yeah, you're talking about something beyond. You're talking about something structural.
Yeah.
You know, you really are. Again, and I don't know the answer to this, but like when the Weinstein thing happened, I kept waiting for a strong sort of, and maybe this has happened, you know, union response from that, because that seems to me, because I think like when you have structural evil, the way to address that is with other structures.
Yeah.
You know, not just people pledging to do better, which is good. Let me be. I'm not, you know, denigrating that at all. It's just that if that's it, I don't know that that's enough, and I don't know that has been it. Again, this is why I was sort of passing in the first place, because maybe there actually is more than that.
Yeah.
You know, going on.
This is the opportunity where we will reach out to the audience and see if they have any questions and maybe some more hopeful ideas to impart. So if you have a question, there'll be people coming around who are bringing microphones. I'm just queue up at the microphone and we'll take your questions. Go ahead, over here.
Oh, sorry, just me. So I know earlier you mentioned that you didn't like being put on the spot because you wanted to sit back and generate your lyrical ideas, but I apologize ahead of time. So I know you mentioned that you can't see the problem of mass incarceration being unwound, but are there any policy solutions that you think our policymakers should champion that you would think would kind of get us back on track to significantly reduce mass incarceration?
Yeah, I mean, that probably is already happening, right? I mean, I know that there's a lot of action, at the state level. I think, giving felons back the right to vote, because I think that's actually part of integrating people back into society. I think that's, really important. We saw action, in the last administration, in terms of crack cocaine. I think all of that's good.
Yeah.
Do you know what the population, what the black population in prisons and jails at this point is? Now I'm putting you on the spot. If you don't, it's okay.
It's significant. I'm looking to my criminal law colleague in the
Anybody
third
give us
row.
a number? I used to have this.
I actually can't.
1 in 4.
One in four black men, and there are about, 40 million of us. So if 20 million of us were, you talking about 5 million?
Yeah.
That's shocking.
I'm just talking about black people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a really shocking.
Sorry, and I'm just talking about black men. Let me be really, really clear about that. I mean, that is, and I don't think prison and jail, it's a kind of abstract word. Once again, I think it hits people in the brain the way sort of like sexual harassment hit me, a thing that's kind of bad, but I don't, again, people die in jail. People are assaulted, in jail. You are completely in the power of somebody else, when you're in jail and you're, in prison. And so the notion that you should be subjected to that, in my opinion, there should be a really high burden for that. It should be a really, really high burden for that. And so it would have to be like some sort of, mass. And you know what? It wouldn't even have to be like it would have to go beyond incarceration, right? Because we would have to figure out why we chose this as a solution in the first place. We would have to figure out why we look at certain populations of people, see mental health issues, and decide that the endpoint for them should be prison. You know what I mean? We see, chemical dependency issues. We see employment issues. We see education, and we decide that the endpoint for that should be prison. And the word decide is getting a little too much, work there. But if you think about the system as an alive thing, because it's not like some, white person saying this is what should happen. You know what I mean? But we make, policy choices all the time. And if the system is angling in that way, even if you could decarcerate, how do we know that it wouldn't be some other punitive, form of justice that we would choose after that?
Yeah. So you're kind of talking about diverting people into diversion programs such as
halfway houses or whatever, and then we would find problems there, right?
Yeah.
We would find punitive problems there.
Okay.
So I think maybe you've actually got me to a place of almost solution. Mm-hmm. You would have to go back and ask why.
Right.
Why? So as not to replicate with another punitive solution.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
Not a problem.
So over here, can you say your name and then state your brief one-part question?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, and I'll give a brief answer. That was actually my fault.
My name is Portia Patterson, and I have a very blurty question, which is, how did you find yourself bridging the balance between writing creatively, for the Black Panther series, and then also writing very scholarly and well-bodied books and articles?
I don't know. I always did that. Like I said, I started off in poetry. You know what I mean? And so it was always a feeling I had. It feels natural to me. I don't know how else to say it.
Do you how do you do your
One part.
Sorry.
Portia.
Okay, no, I'll take it. I promise, I'll take it.
Just so in thinking and processing it, do you have different time you spend on creative versus writing? Or
It's way more chaotic. I do what the nearest deadline is in front of me.
Thank you.
You could be a law professor. Over here.
My name is Rufy Roy. I have a question for both of you guys. Thank you, by the way, for this talk. So I'm a fan of Kamala. I feel that the challenge...
Did you say you're what? You're
I'm a fan of Kamala running, but she's getting a lot of flack for her prosecutorial days, whereas all the other candidates are not going to necessarily get that same flack. So how do we kind of equalize that conversation to kind of hold the fire to those other candidates as well? Because not all those candidates have been very positive for black people as well. Yet she's the one that's going to be put more fire under her foot. So how do you think we kind of help, obviously bring light to that conversation, but keep it going and everybody gets involved in that?
Well, I think, is she the only major candidate that is like declared?
No, there's like
Elizabeth
No,
Warren.
no. Because there are people that have said, I'm exploring, even though we know they're running. Like, I don't
there are
think,
5 of them that have said it. Like Elizabeth Warren's out there.
Leon
Elizabeth
Castro.
Warren actually isn't out. Warren actually isn't. Warren has said, I'm exploring. I understand that she is out. I get what you're saying.
I see what you mean.
But Kamala skipped it. Like, Kamala was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm running. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, she didn't do the whole, you said Gillibrand? Gillibrand? Okay, all right. So I think they're the 2 major ones we've said we're definitely going. So I think that's the first thing. But that doesn't, nullify, your point. I think Warren actually had caught quite a bit for that DNA thing. And I think that's actually going to be a huge problem going forward. Like, I don't think, it was such a boneheaded thing to do.
Yes.
And it feels like, I could be wrong about this, but it feels like it's the kind of decision that's made when there's nobody else of color in the room. Like, it feels like it's a small group of people like Elizabeth Warren, and they decide this is the
It is a moment where you want her to have a black girlfriend who says, girl, don't do a DNA test.
Right, don't. Or Native American. Like, how many Native Americans did you talk about before you
0.
decided? Yeah, I mean, clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly. But that doesn't, I think, the thing that's, I think, happening with Kamala is that the question of law enforcement is so hot right now, after Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean? After that period, that I think there's just going to be a harsher light. I probably could be convinced that that's unfair. I'm not sure it is. I also think that if you're going to exalt in your ties to the African American community, if you're going to have the AKAs come out and support you, if you're going to launch at Howard University, if that's going to be your base, and I'm all for that. If you're going to have offices in Oakland and Baltimore, I'm all for that. I don't know that it's wrong that people hold you to a higher standard in terms of what the effects of your policies have been on black people. I don't know that that's wrong. Obviously, I hope all of the candidates get a kind of scrutiny. And I want to be real clear here, man, because I went through this with Bernie Sanders before. Like, when I offer, this critique, whatever it isn't don't go vote for. Like, that's not what I'm saying. And it's not even like Kamala's a bad person. Like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, I think, this is what this period is for. It's for, figuring out, well, how much, valence should we give that, compared to, say, her position on health care. You know what I mean? Which, probably a lot of us feel a lot more positive about. So I don't know. That was a kind of messy answer to your question.
Over here?
I just wanted to ask.
Your name, please.
Oh, sorry, Daniel Collins. And I am a big fan of your comic book writing and writing about comics. And I just wondered if you could talk about the cultural import of things like Black Panther on advancing some of the social justice issues that we've been discussing today.
Well, I think those of us, who are in the world of policy deeply often underestimate the power of myth. When, the Charlottesville stuff was happening, they were trying to get the statue of Lee taken down. I think it was Chuck Schumer, somebody who, was quoted, and, it was basically like, well, we're not going to, focus on, these symbolic issues. We're going to focus on policy. But symbols, define what your imagination is. And your imagination, therefore, bounds what possible policy you can have. It's not a mistake that, those statues, and I'm getting the comic books, I promise you. It's not a mistake that those statues, went up, during the period of redemption and those early days of Jim Crow. It's intentional. It's intentional. It was a statement on what they thought about the humanity of black people. If I don't think you're human, there's only, a certain amount of, range of policy that I'm going to apply, to you. I would argue that myth is ultimately the source, for instance, of this question that we just finished talking about punitive justice that's, so often directed towards black people, about why, punishment is often seen as the solution. Well, if you believe somebody's less human, that becomes a lot easier to do. How do we decide, who's human? How do we reify those beliefs? How do we, where does the dialogue happen? It happens in the world of narrative. It happens in the world of story. When Woodrow Wilson is screening
Birth of a Nation.
Thank you. Birth of a Nation. at the White House, right? Like that has policy implication. That means something. Something is being broadcast to the wider world about the humanity of black people, and policy takes its cues from there. So it's tremendously, tremendously important, you know? So for me, in the world of comic books, and I don't know how heavily you follow this, but right now, like there's this huge, huge fight, you know, about who's gonna write the comics, you know, how diverse the cast of the comics is gonna be. This ranges all the way into Star Wars. It gets really nerdy, and you can think it's a bunch of nerds over here until you realize that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry they're talking about. And then you realize how central, you know, those notions are. Like those Marvel movies are defining for people who is going to be human and who is not. So, if you give me the opportunity to author some of the source material for that, I mean, as somebody who's concerned about, you know, the humanity of black people, about the humanity of all people, about the policy that comes out of that, why would I not take that? It's right in line with the mission. This is the root of it. The comics are actually, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, the comics and the creative, ultimately, I actually feel like might actually be more important than the journalism. Because when I get to journalism, I'm dealing with end results, right? Like I'm dealing with the decision already having been made that somebody isn't human. But when you're over here, when you're at the level of myth, you are actually fighting the battle of who's, you know, because people are kids today, who's going to be human 20 years from now? Who's going to be human 30, 40, 50 years from now? That's why it's so important. That's why, you know, all of, you know, this diversity, you know, why, you know, Black Panther was so significant. You know, sorry, I'm ranting on this. It's really, I promise I'll get to everybody's question too. I'm not going to cut it short. This is my fault. But this is like really, really important. I'll never forget like when Black Panther came out, that right-wing dude, Ben Shapiro, he tweets out, Wakanda is not real. And then somebody went into his like, Twitter feed. This dude is going off about Game of Thrones and how awesome Game of Thrones is. But that's real though, right? That's real. Of course everybody knows Wakanda is not real, but the statement is actually...
Not everyone here knows that.
Not everyone here knows that.
Ta-Nehisi? Right.
Everyone of a certain age, shall we say?
Okay.
Everyone of a certain age. But of course it's not real, but this is about myth. What he objects to is you creating that myth. You see, like he's objecting, and he's right. Given his particular political perspective, he is right to fight the battle at the level of myth. We make the mistake of diminishing that battle, and it's a huge, huge, huge mistake. That to me is the core. It will bound what policies are possible. If there's any sort of hope for unwinding, you know, mass incarceration, for instance, it begins in the comic books.
So, I want to thank you for writing these because I lured both of my children here tonight with the promise that they would meet the Black Panther. So my daughter thinks Chadwick Boseman is here, and my son thinks he's meeting T'Challa. But I appreciate that they've had a very edifying evening, nonetheless. All right, over here.
Hi, my name is Joseph. First of all, huge fan of your work. Thank you so much for doing this tonight. I thought a lot about what you said about the power of words and also about AOC's use of Twitter. It seems like every day we're inundated with, you know, a new struggle, a new issue. Just yesterday, the Jussie Smollett situation in Chicago. With the speed and sort of the veracity of all these things are happening, do you feel that people are sort of getting numb to some of these tragedies? And what can we sort of do as informed people to sort of push back against that and say, this stuff is actually happening, let's push beyond Twitter activism?
I don't know, man. I mean, shockingly, even though everything what I said about Twitter, now I'm not the hugest fan. I mean, I think, you know, again, you're talking about somebody that came of age in the 80s and 90s. The amount of activism I've seen, real activism that actually, you know, comes out of, you know, online as an organizing tool has been tremendous from my perspective. You know, I grew up at a time where, like, Charles Barkley was walking around talking about how he wasn't a role model, and you couldn't get Michael Jordan to take a position on anything, you know. And now it's like, and I think a lot of this is about, you know, how people use social media. You know, you got LeBron and, you know, D Rose and these folks out here, you know, wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts, you know, like the Los Angeles Rams, a few years back coming out with the hands up. That, again, I think this goes back to symbol. That stuff is so significant. That was unimaginable in my time. It was unimaginable that a Kaepernick would have happened. And I know, like the NFL's, fighting back on that and blackballing, but the very fact that anybody would kneel to begin with, that this would actually be the fight. So I'm pessimistic about, the possibilities. I'm extremely optimistic about the activism, and I find it pretty inspiring. It would be hard for me to argue that that folks are numb to it. I actually do think you've seen, I think, again, going back to, Kamala, I think the whole reason why there's so much heat, for instance, around her criminal justice record, I think social media is a huge part of that, and I think that heat is good. So once again, maybe AOC is right. You know what I mean? She could be, I could be dead wrong on that. I think if anything worries me about, and this, I forgot this, but this worries me with her too, I think the amount of negativity you have to take in on Twitter, I think has serious, real effects. When I left, within 2 months, my wife was like, "You seem like a much happier person." So I worry about that, the ability of what it does to people, who continue to use it. But I'm pretty optimistic about, the activism that's come out of it.
Over here?
Hi, I'm Lena. That's loud. But so I go to the J school also. Sorry I didn't take your class. I feel bad, but
Okay.
so
You have space. I have 10 students. Stop by sometime.
that'd be great. I'd love that. Okay. So
Monday, 9:30 to 12:30.
what days?
Mondays, 9:30 to 12:30.
Sadly, I'm taking a Chinese class, but I'll try.
That's a better class, actually.
I'm barely passing, but back to the question. So I'm a Chinese American. So in our community, well, I can't really speak for South Asian, Southeast Asian, but in the East Asian community, there is this very big struggle of combating anti-Blackness and internalized racism, and it's really difficult to always be calling out people for it, and to not to be that one person who can't figure things out on their own. But what do you think Asian Americans can do to fix that relationship and to address, I guess, racism on the inside?
I don't know. I think it's tough because, okay, so you have a country, right? We are, this is 2019. This is the 400th year, literally, of the African American community in North America. We arrived in Virginia in 1619. We are one of the oldest ethnic groups in this country. Anti-African American, anti-Black sentiment is foundational to the country. It literally would not exist without it. You try to, again, imagine a country without slavery. You can't. You can't. To ask a group of people that is coming to America and entering into America, or even here in America, and has aspirations, to climb up the ladder in America, to not assume the presumptions of the society that they're buying into is really hard.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I'm not telling you, throw up your hands and go home. But understand the historical and systemic forces that are at work. I will tell you one area where I think a conversation could really happen, and that's at Harvard. Because Harvard is being sued right now in the affirmative action case, right? I have my opinions, on affirmative action. I think, again, it's a part of the imagination being shrunk, that we have, allowed ourselves, or maybe not allowed ourselves, been positioned on this thin reed of arguing for diversity, when in fact what we really mean is these people were discriminated against for centuries. And at Harvard, this is especially significant. And here's why. The law school at Harvard, which I was just told tonight, is in a $2 billion, whatever, I think it was said.
He said $4 billion.
$4 billion endowment. That school was literally underwritten by a slave trader, Isaac Royal. It wouldn't exist if it wasn't for slavery. Do you understand? Like this place would not be what it was. If you go back and you look at, the founders, who are involved in Harvard, it will be extremely hard to not find people who have zero ties to the slave trade. Let me make this absolutely, clear for you. We often think of the North as not, having slaves, et cetera. But, during the period that schools like this were founded, there were actually ties to slavery in the West Indies. And that was where so much of the money was. It was very difficult to get any amount of money in the northern colonies at that point and be extricated from the broader system of enslavement. What I am saying is it is somewhat absurd to come to a university that would not exist if not for the oppression of a group of people, and then sue that university for giving a relatively small, given the crime, a relatively small leg up to that same group of people that it wronged in the first place. But I think but why would you know that if you're suing? Why would you know? Does Harvard tell that story? Who tells that story? Why would you know that? You come into the country, or you're here, excuse me, I want to be really clear, you grew up in the country, and your feeling is, well, I want it to be fair. That's what everybody says, America is. Everybody says, you work hard, you get what you get, you take your, test, you get your score, and then you get right. That's what I want, a meritocracy. Ignoring the fact that the entire existence of the university is not in and of itself meritocratic, that it begins, with a great crime. So I think, around an issue like that, I actually think that's so blatant and so, obvious. Yeah. Because of the university's explicit known roots in a crime. That is to say nothing also of what, a university did, like Harvard did in terms of constructing the architecture of white supremacy itself, by which I mean giving it scholarly backing, that sort of thing. I think maybe if folks knew that and took it in that sort of context, it's not that they wouldn't sue, but maybe they would sue the legacy students instead. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
This is the cost of predicating affirmative action on a diversity
right.
rationale,
That's
as
right.
opposed to a
That's right.
remedial or
right.
reparative.
That's right. And I think people know that in the back of their head, but, they're out on this thin reed of diversity, and it's tough.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Lauren Billy. Thank you both for being here. I saw you at the Apollo with Nicole Hannah-Jones a couple months ago, and I thought it was so interesting. I read your work and listen to podcasts you're on, and I've always appreciated that really what it seems you do is, I love how you say "I don't know" so often, and that you cover what you see based in all the history that you know. And what you said on stage was you've been wondering if you should do more. And you said that literally you were just Googling about homeless shelters nearby and should you go teach a creative writing class? And I thought it was so cool as someone who's a thought leader who I read to talk about that internal questioning. And I heard you when you just talked about what you're doing with myth and how that is influencing the future. And I've always wondered, as someone who's interested in politics, what if you were helping to use what you depict in society and the history that you know to actually influence policies and storytelling from that great of a platform? And have you thought about that? And have you thought any more about if you should do more, and what is that?
Yeah, I have. But I'm going to take the second, because that's the one that weighs on me. I probably at some point going to have to reorganize my life. To give you an idea right now, I have 2 comic book deadlines. I have a book deadline, and I have a screenwriting deadline, and I got class on Monday. I think I'm giving another lecture here in a month that I have not written yet, which I have to write out. But you see, all of those are rich people's problems. Those are champagne problems. Do you understand? That's the life I wanted. And at some point, and I like to work. I really enjoy working. At some point, I will probably have to ask myself, and at some point really soon. I think the work does good things, right? I think it's part of the war, but it's what I love. Do you know what I mean? It almost doesn't even feel like fighting to me. It just feels like, why would I do anything else? And I'll say this again, and then I go and I get on the subway, which looks like a rolling homeless shelter these days. And I have like these deep questions about what am I doing? Like, what am I actually, like, if I'm so, bothered and offended by this, not, actually offended by the homeless people themselves, but offended that this is our policy, what am I doing? And so, no, I haven't figured that out yet. I haven't figured out how to arrange my life in such a way that, I can do more. In answer to your second question, yeah, I think about that all the time, in terms of policy. I actually hope that's the effect.
If I was running for office, I would try and recruit you to be on my team.
I would stay as far away from you as I could. Not out of any offense towards you, you know what I mean? But like, I kind of went through this with Obama. It's like, you don't want to, and I didn't actually, but I'm saying, as journalists, you don't want to be friends with like the people you got to stay far away, man. As much as you admire them and love them, even like it's the ones who you love, you got to stay the furthest away from, actually. Like I would never want to like have drinks with AOC. I just couldn't. Like that would be like I need to respect from afar. I need to love, from afar.
What if they were telling the truth?
One part.
Thank you.
Over. Hi, my name's Sarah. So I have a little one at home who's 3 and is sort of now just starting or at an age where he's picking up, on the world and obviously seeing how these structural inequities play out and what that means for his friends or what it means to see 2 men holding hands on the street and trying to understand that. And my question is, and to your point earlier about, people came up to you and were like, I didn't know what redlining was, and it was an honest question. Like, how do you think about raising a generation of kids so that they actually are equipped so that those sort of situations don't happen or they happen far less frequently?
Kids who nap but stay woke.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. My son's 18 now. So actually, I think Melissa should answer that question. Because I think she's going through it right now, right? Like,
My son is asleep in the second row. Obviously not doing the greatest job.
I don't know. I literally don't know.
That's fine. I don't either.
Over here?
Hi, my name is Victoria Albert. I'm also a journalist. And so you were talking about how both with racism and with sexism, it can be really difficult to communicate what it feels like to be a victim of that to someone who will never have that as part of their lived experience. And so what techniques do you use as a journalist to convey your lived experience to people who will never go through it themselves?
So this is actually why I think beautiful writing is actually important. When people think beautiful, they think flowers and bows and rainbows and angels. But that's not what you're actually doing. You are taking an abstraction and you are making it as detailed and as clear as you possibly can. And if you're injecting rhythm, as I sometimes do, into your sentences, you're not doing that so that the person can nod their head. You're doing it so that the actual rhythm that you inject reflects something about the situation you're in. And so like for me, the first thing I do is make sure that I am being as specific as I possibly can and as detailed as I possibly can, because the whole challenge is to get the person from to take the MeToo thing, to get the person from an abstract idea, like sexual harassment, which, a bunch of, good-hearted people can say they're against and think is a problem in America, down to an actual person, down to that actual room, and to paint that room with as much clarity as you possibly can. Now, first thing you got to do is have done the reporting to be able to do that, right? Like you got to get enough on the record and enough, clarity from your end, and then you have to write the hell out of it, by which I do not mean overwrite, but in a kind of efficient, packing as much, information as you can into every word. I think like that matters. I think you got to listen to people. I remember when I was reporting Case for Reparations, and I interviewed this guy, Clive Ross, and I was sitting in his living room, and he was 90 at the time, 91. And I said, Mr. Ross, where are you originally from? We're on the west side of Chicago. He said, I'm from Mississippi. And I said, wait. He said, the Delta. I said, home of the blues. He said, yeah. I said, why did you come to Chicago? This was so early. I'll never forget this in the reporting. He said, because there was no law. And I said, well, what does that mean? Of course there were laws, in Mississippi. He said, there were no black police, no black prosecutors, no black judges. That's no law. And I was like, wow. What he's saying is that he was basically subject to anarchy. He had no protection. Anything could happen to him. There was no law. And he explained, he said, and then I came to Chicago, and as he explained in the story, I got ripped up, and I found it was no law here. I never would have thought of that on my own. But it was such a clear explanation of what was going on, and it went from the abstract of racism, down to this very specific thing of no law. And that's what you try to do, when you write. That's what I hope, I'm teaching, to get people down to be able to write on that kind of, granular, but not tedious, level. I think it's so important. There are words and phrases that I just basically banned from the classroom. You can't say white privilege in my class. You can't say patriarchy in my class. Not because I don't think those things exist, but because we're writers, right? Like we're writers. And writers, have to get past that kind of assumed phraseology that people have into the granular and the specific so that you can get the people to come up to you and say, I didn't know.
Thank you.
Over here. Hi, I'm Gina. I had to ask this question because it came up today in the Family Defense Clinic here at NYU. We were talking actually about a comment you had made, Professor Murray, at a symposium last week on racial justice in the child welfare system, and you'd said that that because the child welfare system is one of these technologies of discipline, like mass incarceration, that it affects all of society and not just communities of color. At least that's what the class had interpreted your question to say, and maybe we misinterpreted it. So my question is that true? And I mean, obviously it seems like these technologies of discipline, as you call them, really mainly, almost only affect communities of color. And if that's the case, then how do we get white people to care?
So I don't think you misinterpreted. I do think that I was saying it as a Black woman. So even though I am relatively insulated from the child welfare system because of class privilege, I recognize that I'm a Black woman parenting in the world. And so I think that. But I do think that the child welfare system is meant to model a particular kind of parenting for everyone, right? And it is certain communities that feel the weight of that model more acutely than others.
I don't know anything about the child welfare system.
So, you have to come.
Very interested.
You should come to family law. You will this was a terrific conversation.
What's the course?
So the course is called Family Law, and it's, marriage, divorce, property distribution, child custody, parenthood, and as part of parenthood, we talk about the child welfare system. But, it seems so arcane, but if you're going to go to law school, you need to take family law.
Why?
Well, we have all these courses at the law school, administrative law. The former dean of the law school is smiling, but I'm going to burn administrative law right now. It's probably not the case that lots of people will leave the law school and become bureaucrats. Some of them will, but not all of them will. Every single person who comes to law school comes from a family, whether it's functional, whether it's dysfunctional, whether it's fractured, and many of them will have families. And you are regulated in every way in your family life, in all of these ways. And the family serves such an important role for the state. And I just think, you should know about it. Before you get married, you should know what it means, what you are getting into, what it has meant historically, in a way that I think is really different from any other kind of course. So, I said this all the time at Berkeley. If you're not taking this class, if you're getting married and not taking this class, you are doing it wrong.
That's a great argument. Wow.
Full of them. Okay. Gina, more questions?
I just wanted to clarify then, do you think that the way that the family is disciplined or disciplines all families is different than mass incarceration and how that disciplines everyone?
I think these are systems of discipline, and they work systematically and in concert, and they are totally interwoven and interwoven. And one of the things that's really hard about law school is that we're so siloed. There's criminal law, there's family law, but these things intersect constantly.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, thank you both for being here tonight. Excuse me, I'm under the weather. My name is Samuel. I'm a first-year law student here at the law school. And I have a question for you both, but especially for you, Mr. Coates. As a person of color, when you come to law school, you recognize you're entering an institution that was not built with you in mind. And me personally, I am struggling and vacillating between, I know I want to enter the criminal justice system, work in the criminal justice system, between whether my role is on the defense side or on the government side. And a conversation, we've been talking.
You mean prosecutorial?
Prosecutorial. And a conversation that's happening now, we've talked about Kamala Harris as well as our former President Obama, is how important the role of government actors are in dismantling mass incarceration, dismantling the system that exists as it is today. But at the same time, at least in my life, I question whether or not I can survive and my ideals can survive, my orientation. As you said, I can't count on both hands how many people I have in my family who are incarcerated or have been at some point in time. If I can survive in that system, as part of a system that, again, was not built with me in mind. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
That's a great question, because it's easy now to give this critique of Kamala, right? But when you take it from here, and let's take the other side. I mean, are we saying that there should be no black prosecutors? Is that what we're actually saying? Or do you urge black people not to be? I don't think that's what we're saying. I think that's a little too crude. One of my favorite phrases from Frederick Douglass is, and again, excuse the gendered nature of this. I think I said this at the MLK thing. A man is worked on by what he works on, for as he carves out his circumstances, his circumstances carve him out. And so, you started with this notion of law school not being built for you. And so, while it probably is true, and I'm not just granting this, actually true, that you need black folks, who are prosecutors. I guess I should say my brother's a prosecutor, by the way. My younger brother's a prosecutor in Prince George's County, Maryland. So I have some familiarity with this argument. It probably does things to you. It probably gets you to a point where you think that pointing the gun of the state at somebody to administer aid is actually a good thing. And maybe, judged against what other prosecutors are doing, it is, you know what I mean? If you, take it in the context of, everything else. But I watched those videos and I was like, man, this is clearly a conversation that's only happening over, here, the job has worked on her, in a certain way. If there are certain presumptions already about black people, within, not within the legal system, but within the country, embedded in the country itself, and the state then goes out and has to enforce laws that originate and, come out of the roots of that, out of the country itself, how does one prosecute and not somehow be part of that? That's tough. That's really, really, really tough. At the same time, I don't think the answer is to say, we're not going to be, this kind of complete withdrawal. I don't think that's a luxury that we have. I mean, so what I would say, and Melissa probably has a better handle on this than I do, but what I would probably say is, you have to do what's in your heart, right? But be aware of the price you're paying. You know what I mean? Be aware of the price you're paying. And I would extend that further. Be aware of the price you're paying if you even decide not to be a prosecutor. Be aware of the price of not, doing it. I've gone through this, quite a bit myself, in journalism, where I've gone into newsrooms where there were no black people and there were no women, and I ended up making mistakes and doing things that I would not have done if the makeup of the newsroom were different. But I entered into it. Do you understand? It was my dream to be there. It was my dream to be part of it. The way I wrestle, I'm doing this, greater good. But I've also become part of something, part of a machine that does certain things, So maybe to some extent we all face this, It is a tough question, and the answer I give here, I don't know that it's particularly sufficient, but I recognize the complexity, of the problem.
I think it's a complicated question. Full disclosure, my husband was a prosecutor for 4 years, and I think he felt that it was important to have black voices in that conversation when you're deciding about whether to invoke the authority of the state in all of these circumstances. And I think there were places where his voice made a difference. I would turn the question, though, back on you, Samuel. You say that law school is a place that was built and not built for you. And I assume that means you would want the law school to have more professors of color. Yeah? Then you should want there to be more prosecutors of color, too. Right? I mean, and I say this, I mean, I hated law school, and there are times when I'm like, have I become the man? And you know, like how to struggle with doing this job while also remembering the things that I felt that you feel now. And so I think it's complicated.
If you become a prosecutor, like, can you like go and like be like public defender? Like, can you go back and forth? Like, can you
Can't
not
be a
back
public,
and forth?
no, you can't be a public defender. You can go and defend Walmart afterwards.
Why can't you go and be a public defender?
I think the distrust between the two sides of that is too intense for there to be a lot of cross-fertilization. Although I will say, when my husband left the prosecutor's office, the public defenders came to his party because he was known as being the reasonable one. Over here.
On a different note, hi, my name is Caleb Duncanson, and I grew up in the New York suburbs, but now live in Manhattan. And as someone who's a person of color, with some of the discourse that's been going on in recent years, one of the things that's been scariest to me is not necessarily the outright racist cries from people within this country, but from the actual people who believe they have very liberal or woke views, but are not necessarily aware of them. And I think earlier you mentioned when you talked about MeToo movement and how you had that moment of knowing, or where before it was just an abstract concept.
That moment of actually realizing that
actually realizing, yeah. And so my question is, as the everyday person, how do we get more people to come to those moments when it comes to issues of race and gender?
Yeah, I mean, once again, I would make the argument for journalism, and I would make the argument for great journalism. I think that when it's done right, that's exactly what it does. That's what it did for me, and I don't think I was the only one. Right. I think what journalism does is, again, it takes these abstract issues when it's doing it right, and it puts faces to it, and it puts stories to it, and it puts details to it, so much so that, again, when it's working right, you can see yourself, in that place.
For those of us who are not journalists, though.
You know what I'm going to do. One part question.
Well, that was part of the question, is for those of us who are just everyday people.
I don't know. I mean, this is the tool I have. This is the tool I use.
Got it. Thank you.
Should we make this the last one?
Why don't we take the two?
Okay.
Let's take the questions as a group, and then you might touch on each other. So over here, can you say your question?
Hi, good evening. My name is Jamila Stevens. I do not attend NYU. My sister does, and she surprised me because she knows you are my favorite author. So thank you for being here. So we were talking about mass incarceration, and you were saying that Black people don't have to look too far to find someone who's been incarcerated. And I'm only 32, and my uncle has been incarcerated twice. My uncle, I'm sorry, I'm under the weather. Can I move it? Oh, let me bend down. He's been incarcerated twice in my lifetime. And the first time I was a child in the 90s, and then the second time I was an adult in the 2010s. And the main difference that I saw with the penitentiary system is that now it is really a business. And I feel like we talked about it, but that kind of got skipped over. And when he would call home, for instance, in the 90s, you call collect, you pay for it, what have you. Now, Global Tellink is an entire operation and a business that profits off of mass incarceration. So similar to you, I'm very pessimistic that it will be undone because there are so many businesses and billionaires tied to this, feeding into making sure that mass incarceration continues because they're making so much money. So my question to you is, how do you feel about the business side that has come into mass incarceration?
Right, so the business side of mass incarceration over here briefly.
Yes, hi, my name is Virginia. I was going to just reference the discussion about the job as conflict. It's a lot like the quote that life is the art of contradiction. So I think, but that was not my question. Seeing that you said about, and you spoke eloquently about the role of myth is to reveal often the core power dynamics. It seems to me also in this conversation that we need to really be able to name the systemic crisis, not in the abstract mental health world, but in actually the realities of people's happiness, in their loneliness, in their isolationism, and in the power dynamics that happen in families and in communities. And I would just say, because it seems to me lately that the 99% are not as happy as the dream team of the 1%. And I think that's another way to reframe the question, which is that we need to address the needs of people and in their lives and how they're operating in their lives today.
So addressing rampant inequality and the needs of those who have considerably less. All right, over here, your question?
Hi, my name is Matthew Singh, and I work in the affordable housing industry where, broadly speaking, we apply finance and philanthropy in order to alleviate issues of poverty. And recently there's been a turn, rather than focusing on sort of traditional mechanisms of welfare to thinking more broadly about the justice question. And I wonder if you've given any thought to or have some ideas around how both philanthropy and finance, in a very typical sense of the term, whether it's equity or lending, can actually contribute to the furtherance of racial justice, social justice in the legal sense that we're talking about here.
And over here, last question.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm on the voting team at the Brennan Center. I'm curious how you think about the role of the journalist when there are competing goals. And what I'm thinking of in particular, we were working on Amendment 4 in Florida last fall, and we were getting polling data saying that as soon as you start talking about race, people become less supportive of it. White people become less supportive of it. So in a context like that, how does the journalist choose between reporting in a way that is maybe more likely to help Amendment 4 pass versus truth-telling and calling a spade a spade?
Right, so a lot of questions. One about the business of mass incarceration, one broadly about inequality and how to address that, one about the use of philanthropy and finance to address the problem of racial justice, and then finally voting.
Yeah, so the business side is like one of the arguments for why, I was arguing it's going to be hard to unwind this. Prisons are a job program in a lot of communities in America. They are, places where it's been deindustrialized, you build a prison, and this provides jobs. Again, you're dealing with a social problem that people have decided to address by being punitive towards black people. So it's difficult for me to see something that is that enmeshed. One of the reasons I say people fought so hard against Obamacare is because once it got in, it would be extremely hard to pull it out once it became a part of the fabric. I think the same thing goes for mass incarceration. I think it's the exact same thing. Second question was about inequality. And
broadly, how to address the needs of those,
yeah,
the 99%.
I think there are people who are doing that a lot better than me right now. I think, perhaps you should be like AOC on Twitter. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe that's what's happening because people can't, get away from it. I mean, these billionaires in Davos, they had to address it. The best part of that, just a quick aside, was Michael Dell being like, where has that ever happened and worked? And the dude being like, well, in America, actually. Your country. So, I mean, I think actually we're in that period where it really, is happening. The third was?
Philanthropy and finance.
No, I have nothing to say about that at all because I just don't know. I've done no reporting, no anything, even close, to that world. And the fourth question was about journalism and voting and how you report if you don't like what the story. No, you call a spade every time. Every time. I'm sorry it's going to hurt, but I actually believe that lying over the long term would hurt more. I'm sorry it makes, and this is why, I always say this, and people get kind of upset. This is why I say I'm not an activist, and I have to actually keep my distance from politicians and activism, because I understand why the politician or the activist has to phrase things a certain way, because they're trying to get immediate action on a particular issue. That's fine, but the calling of the journalist is something different, and that is to, illuminate these kind of overarching truths that may in the moment make things difficult, but I kind of believe in the long term, you can't really get away from.
So I have one last question. I'll be really brief because you all look antsy, but do you follow Meghan Markle and the British royal family?
I mean, you know what? I didn't. For a long time, I couldn't figure out what the significance was of her being black. And then that wedding happened, and I was like, oh.
Because it was kind of the blackest wedding ever.
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild. But everybody around me does, so I guess I have to.
I think Meghan Markle totally fits into your whole view of black exceptionalism, right? So she is this incredibly educated, very attractive, very well-spoken, and really committed woman. And she has so married up. I mean, Prince Harry is punching way above his weight, and he knows it, right? And she's punching way above the rest of the family. And she's...
Really? Is that true? I don't know. No, I'm not like objecting. I actually don't know. Like, I haven't read.
Yeah. She could run circles around the rest of them. She's being pilloried. I mean, and it reminds me so much of President Obama. And the only reason she could be in this position is because she is actually exceptional. She's a unicorn. And so having read all of your work, I mean, I read all of your work for this interview, and I have to say, I usually read your work episodically, but for this, I read it all together, which is a very depressing enterprise.
So sorry.
Altogether.
I don't know. I wouldn't do that to myself.
But I'm left with the weight of black exceptionalism is so real. And I mean, you have to be twice as good to get half as far as you say. And even then, when you get there, just constantly avoiding being torn down entirely. And so it makes me wonder, like, maybe the greatest marker of success for black people would be to have all of the markers of success while also being utterly mediocre.
Yeah, no, I think that's when you will know things are equal. You know what I mean? Like, I think the president is a great example of this. I maintain if Donald Trump was born black, he would have been killed. No, I mean that literally.
Or in prison.
No, I'm not like, this is not like mocking. I mean that the way those communities work, because that's the flip side of what we just finished outlining, this punitive approach. They punish you. They punish ignorance. And they punish it harshly. There would be, I mean, it would have just ended badly. And so at the point, like, I can't imagine somebody like that being on, like, a mayor, much less a president. You know what I mean? And so at the point, I guess, when black people can be that ignorant and obtain that much power, that will be the end of racism, I guess.
To mediocrity.
That's when we'll know. That's when we'll know.
All right, on that note, let me just extend a huge NYU thank you to Ta-Nehisi Coates, author and distinguished writer in residence at NYU's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. We are so glad to have you here at NYU. We wish you well in your projects ahead. I'm Melissa Murray of the NYU Law School, a member of the board for the Brennan Center for Justice. So let me just say, you can follow the Brennan Center online, brennancenter.org, and also follow us on Twitter and keep abreast of the Brennan Center's fantastic work and programs just like this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming out.